Well, now my heart is. Pull up a sack and rest your weary bones while I tell a story of times of yore and a ship called the Mytonia. I've just been doing a little bit of tidying up, and I know that's a shock to some people, as much of a shock as me spending money on things, but hey, I've been doing some tidying up and I found a piece of written work that I wrote some time ago, and looking through it, in 2010 I wrote this. And we need to transport ourselves away from this little corner of quiet France and back to the bustling waterways that surround Canvey Island in Essex. And I titled this piece The Latest Maiden Voyage of the Mytonia. How can you have the latest maiden voyage of a ship? Oh well, never mind, but if Shakespeare had written the story, the characters would have been Pistol, Bardolph and Nym. You may wonder if Shakespeare would concern himself with goings-on such as may be found in the Boatyard. Well, of course he would. The people that you will find there are all characters, all comedians of sorts. And they are all very much alive and up to mischief. If they don't own a boat of their own, they will be found around someone else's, and they will give a hand whether wanted or not. And this chapter, or paragraph of the book that is the Boatyard, revolves around a boat called Mytonia. Now, Mytonia was once one of the many small craft operated by Trinity House, wandering about, servicing navigational buoys and generally adding to the safety of mariners, professional and otherwise. Yeah, definitely some of the otherwise involved in this story. It is probably in her nature to see that all who sail in her will reach dry land safely, if not always entirely dry. She arrived in the yard owned by Norfolk Steve. That's not actually his name. Norfolk isn't his name, but we had a collection of people who liked to be called Steve, and this particular one we always referred to as Norfolk Steve because he was born in Suffolk. Yeah, well, whatever, just bear with me. Yeah, so Mytonia arrived in the yard without an engine, wearing a strange shed up forward. Oh dear, nautical expressions creeping in already, which served as a wheelhouse and cabin. She was tied to a jetty next to one of the yard residents, and she soon came to the attention of one of the yard experts. Expert in drinking tea, that is, or sometimes swoop. His name is Harry Faber, which should be changed to save embarrassment, but he might not always be charitable enough to hide the blushes of others, so hard luck to him. There's something about Steve that endears him, a lanky sort of bloke, naturally untidy, generous of spirit, and most definitely a character. And where Steve goes, it is likely that you'll meet Mark, another man of generous spirit, equally untidy but short. Mark was invited into Mytonia. Harry invited himself. Yeah, no change there then. And the pair of them watched over the next few months as Steve fitted an engine. First one gearbox, then another. They sometimes helped by moving things around or by pulling a rope or simply emptying mugs of tea so that they would be ready for the next one. And they also gave opinion mainly of the unqualified variety. Now, despite this help, Steve made the engine run. managed to make it turn the old propeller, and became optimistic enough to build a neat wheelhouse aft and demolish the shed that had been up front. Odd bits of cable and chain joined the wheel to the rudder and a throttle lever to the engine. Now the story moves to the 31st of March 2010. It was a day of blustery winds, sharp showers and a very high tide. Not a day for little boats, but a sturdy old lady like Mytonia was built for all the tasks in all weathers. As Harry entered the yard, so did Steve. Steve announced that he was going to start up Mytonia and made the mistake of allowing Harry to appoint himself as ordinary seaman for the journey. As the pair passed the Black Pig, a boat owned by Mark, a small head appeared at the porthole. A shouted invitation to Mark to join the cruise caused some minor difficulty. The Black Pig, neatly moored to a ramshackle jetty, was cut off by the high tide from land and dry surfaces. Not a huge problem. Small of rope, put me teeth back in, a small amount of rope pulling allowed Mark to walk to dry land and join the crew. Well, instead of running up a Blue Peter, unable seaman Harry reported the departure to resident Bob and Squirt, the four-legged honorary first officer to any boat that pulls next to a jetty. Steve boarded Mytonia and convinced the engine into life, making all those reassuring big diesel noises that cause seamen to think about untying ropes. Tea was served, or was it coffee? Not always easy to tell, but it served the twin purposes of replacing any form of pay for the crew and giving time for the engine to warm up before ropes were untied. Those of you who have watched old war films will know that captains shout things like "single up lines" or "let go forward, let go aft," and that mariners use all words intended to confuse landlubbers like forespring or painter and so on. But this crew simply untied all the odd bits of rope which kept Mytonia trapped at her jetty. Steve reversed her straight into the wreck of the sad ship Sea Cow and then drove her forward, hitting the jetty. Once more for luck, he reversed into the Cow and then asked to be tied up to the jetty, which the crew were very happy to do. All appeared not right in the steering department. Our noble captain asked for a stabby thing. A Phillips screwdriver was passed from a murky toolbox and a piece of stray wood prized from the steering pulleys. Ropes were again untied, and after a strange 47-point turn, Mytonia was driven out to the choppy waters of Benfleet Creek. Now, there were no cries of "give me a tall ship to sail in," but smiles all round. Steve pointed her towards Pitsea and urged the engine to give the boat more progress, which she made very nicely. Shame that she didn't seem to steer too well, requiring more effort than seemed right to get her to turn. However, she made the first run past Benfleet railway station and turned for a return run back towards the bridge that links Canvey to the rest of the world. Again, with much effort, she turned back towards Pitsea, and Steve offered the wheel to Mark, and all seemed well with the world, until the gear stick came off in Mark's hand. Steve fell on his knees, screwdriver in hand, to lift a floorboard. Mark kept a course, Harry offered advice, and the boat was turned with the aid of both wind and tide. From the bilge came odd noises, including some profanity of the type best used at sea away from the delicate ears of young ladies or elderly vicars. The gear stick was back where it should be, but Steve's tobacco was floating in that strange mix of water and oil that seemed to be present in every bilge. A decision was made and Mark guided Mytonia back towards her safe berth. Harry gave advice. Ropes were tied, the engine stopped, and Steve announced he would like to turn her round. Now, discretion insists that the fine detail of the operation to turn her remained secret, but as the tide fell, Mytonia was seen to be adopting a strange angle, nestled up to poor old Sea Cow and not against her jetty. Well, there were no wrecks and nobody drowned, but there was plenty to laugh at. Unless you have to add the trip to your personal log of maritime adventure in the hope of convincing the world that you know what you are doing. There we are, tales of a bygone age. Actually only 14 years ago, isn't it? 14 years ago. Goodness, where did those 14 years go? The last I saw of Mytonia, Norfolk Steve had sold her. Now, he sold her to a man that we simply knew as Hippie. And I don't think any of us ever discovered his real name. We called him Hippie because he told us to, and he was a bit taller than me, and he had a lot more hair than I have, which sort of covered more than his ears and halfway down to his shoulders. And Hippie decided that he was going to go boat camping with his entire family. And he duly paid Norfolk Steve an agreed amount, which was kept secret. I don't know quite why. But anyway, off Steve went with a fistful of dollars, and Hippie set about turning Mytonia into a ship suitable for camping. Now, she had got a mast and she had got a spar, and converting her into a camping boat involved putting a tarpaulin over the spar and nailing it to the deck in a sort of triangular sort of shape to give a sort of tent thing. Hippie's family never expressed an opinion as to what they thought about this. And the date arrived for the departure, and the tide was fair and the weather wasn't too bad, and Hippie, who had never done anything bigger than rowing a little rowing boat, set off in this very old, very heavy ship. We last saw him heading out towards Leon Sea, in that general direction. Sometime later we did hear that the owner of the yard at Brightlingsea had managed to get Mytonia tied up alongside a jetty after some sort of malfunction, and we never saw her again. I haven't seen Norfolk Steve for years, and Mark, the last time I saw him, he was helping me to put up a mast on someone else's yacht. Yeah, sometimes it's good to look back on our past, and sometimes it's best to forget some of the fine detail.